For the latest on the Trump administration's court ruling on tariffs and what's next, let's bring in U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Jamieson Greer. It's great to have you on today. It was great last time. Welcome back. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
I guess we'll start with some of your comments about the rulings yesterday and the prospects for what is likely to happen. I know there's a lot of things that are being discussed right now. Do you think if we were to get emergency relief from the Supreme Court, you think they'd come down on the president's side? Do you think you have a strong case, or will it stand the way it is right now?
Well, I think we have a very strong case. Congress clearly delegated to the president the ability to take action when there's a national emergency. We've declared a national emergency. We've taken action. We have a stay from the circuit court right now. All the other countries I'm dealing with in negotiations are treating this as just kind of a bump in the road rather than any fundamental change. So I feel pretty confident about the case, and if the case, goes the other way, we have other tools as well.
Yeah, I've expressed that sentiment earlier that you don't know what you've got till it's gone. As a pure conservative and a markets type guy, tariffs, I think they can be effective, but there's times when you kind of wish that we would just maybe not be doing as many. But then we've come along so far, Mr. Ambassador, that to pull the rug out from the negotiating ability by making all these countries we're negotiating with think that the tariffs might not stick. That's frustrating. But you're telling me again that none of those countries expressed any. They weren't saying, all right, we're going to pull out of these negotiations because we don't need to anymore.
It's actually the opposite. When I woke up, the morning after the initial ruling, before we had the stay, I had emails and texts from foreign officials saying, we're just going to keep negotiating with you as before. We understand that these are, this is litigation. Things go up and down. We understand the U.S. policy going forward, and we're negotiating with you as before. So that's what's happening.
I guess you've read enough about some people view the emergency, that provision as maybe not being the best way to do it. Is it possible you would use the Trade Act of 1974? You get 150 days, and then you have to actually go on an individual basis and prove that tariffs are something to be done. Is that being looked at this point?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that the president's trade team has been thinking about these legal tools for years, right? We have a lot of folks on TV and the internet who've been thinking about it for about 6 minutes. So, of course, these are things that we've been considering and talking about for a very long time. All these things are on the table. The reality is we have this enormous trade deficit. It got worse over the Biden years. And if we don't fix the global trading system, it's just going to get even worse going forward. And we have to fix it.
Right, but you think you could convince the Supreme Court that suddenly the Rubicon was passed in terms of the trade deficit, that now it's an emergency, but it hasn't been an emergency? We've had a trade deficit for decades. And I just think, isn't it hard to make the case suddenly it's reached that level, that it's now an emergency?
No, I don't think that's a problem. And in fact, the lower court that took issue with the president's action, it wasn't really on the nature of the emergency so much as their views on the implementation. The reality is the trade deficit has exploded by 40% over the past 4 years. It was $850 billion around the beginning of the Biden administration, ended at $1.2 trillion. So that's extreme by any measure. It's one thing to have a deficit or surplus that fluctuates over time, but to have it increase so substantially in such a short time and be accompanied, by also a worsening in our net international investment position, where we're at negative $26 trillion at the end of last year. I mean, this is crazy stuff where foreign firms and individuals have claims on U.S. assets in a way they've never had it before, and that's a dangerous situation.
James, this is what's happening in the markets is not you, as far as I can tell. There has been, President Trump just did post on Truth Social saying that, in his words, 2 weeks ago, China was in grave economic danger. The very high tariffs I set made it virtually impossible for China to trade in the United States marketplace, which is by far #1 in the world. We went, in effect, cold turkey with China, and it was devastating for them. Many factories closed, to put it mildly. There was civil unrest. I saw what was happening and didn't like it for them, not for us. I made a fast deal with China in order to save them from what I thought was going to be a very bad situation. And I didn't want to see that happen. Because of this deal, everything stabilized, got back to business as usual. Everybody was happy. That's the good news. Bad news is that China, perhaps not surprisingly, has totally violated its agreement with us. So much for being Mr. Nice Guy. Did you know about, you have a heads up about this?
I mean, this has been something we've been discussing ever since Geneva. You know, the president, you know, I speak to him nearly daily basis, as do his other advisors, and we've been very focused on monitoring Chinese compliance, or in this case, non-compliance, with the agreement. And we're very concerned with it. We moved, as the president just said, very quickly. No one can deny that. The United States did exactly what it was supposed to do, and the Chinese are slow rolling their compliance, which is completely unacceptable and has to be addressed.
Is it beneficial for this negotiation now to be effectively taking place in public? I mean, there's been some level of which this has already happened with us. We've actually been quieter, frankly, than they have to some degree. But the president's comments today, obviously, as we're watching the market, you know, this is complicating things.
Well, I mean, listen, I would say there are, you know, a lot of different ways to deal with folks. You make every effort to be diplomatic and professional and to do things behind closed doors. You know, but at some point, you know, the impact on the U.S. economy or the trade relationship becomes such that it's hard to withhold that anymore.
We might have gotten a little bit of a heads up on this from last night when the Treasury Secretary in an interview said that talks had completely stalled with China, and that it was going to take a phone call with President Trump to President Xi to get things back on track, and he expected that in the next couple of weeks. Can you say that? Is that in the works?
Yes, that's accurate. And, you know, the Treasury Secretary, you know, his characterization is accurate, of course. I would say that, you know, conversations and calls continue at lower levels. But ultimately, the nature of the things we're talking about, it does require some leader-to-leader understandings, right? We made a huge effort in Geneva to accommodate the Chinese. And listen, it always ends up being this way, whether it's the United States or other Western countries have always sought to accommodate the Chinese. We've had open markets, et cetera. And time again, you know, we see the Chinese come down and not comply with their agreements, you know, slow roll compliance, you know, not open their economy like they should. Right. So unfortunately, we're seeing that trend continue.
And I ask this effectively on behalf of just the folks who are watching us. Can you tell us specifically what they did or frankly didn't do in this case?
Well, remember, when the United States imposed reciprocal tariffs on the world, right? This wasn't China specific. There were other, you know, countries that had higher tariff rates than China assigned to them. China was the only country to retaliate. Remember that. And so the president was forced to retaliate to maintain the effectiveness of the tariff. Now, when the Chinese yeah, let me get to that. When the Chinese retaliated, it wasn't just with a tariff. They put in place countermeasures where they put certain U.S. companies on blacklists. They restricted the flow of rare earth magnets to us and other countries in the world. And so when they agreed in Geneva to remove their tariff and their countermeasures, they removed the tariff like we did, but some of the countermeasures they've slowed on. If you read the news, you can see that Europe, Japan, United States, elsewhere, we haven't seen the flow of some of those critical minerals as they were supposed to be doing.
We have also heard, I guess this was Kevin Hassett in this case, that there may be something forthcoming in the next week or so in terms of some of these trade deals, maybe with some of our important partners. Can you shed any light on that?
Sure. I mean, I'll say that I have almost standing calls with the Indian trade minister every day. You know, I have meetings next week at the OECD with the Malaysians, the Vietnamese, the EU. You know, we're in intensive talks with all of them. You know, we also want to, you know, make sure we kind of get through the stay and appeals with the current tariff situation, so our partners have a better understanding of the landing zone. But like I said before, the negotiations are on track, and we do hope to have some deals in the next couple of weeks.
What's is there a running total on how much has been garnered so far on the tariffs, James? I mean, we're now in the we haven't moved on, but we're talking a lot about the big beautiful bill, and there are, you know, some concerns about deficits, et cetera, and even though it can't be included maybe in the CBO estimates, anything would be good to add to, to try to pay our debts.
No, I think that's right. And listen, obviously the president's action is based on a national emergency and getting down the deficit. But to the extent you have tariffs, there is a revenue effect. And if you look at the revenue effect, I'm not the OMB guy, but it's hundreds of billions of dollars if the tariffs go forward as currently drafted. When
do we expect to hear about whether you need to take a different route in terms of whether you'd need to go to that 1974? I mean, the president, I think, the first time in his first administration, did he not use that 1974 Act for some of the tariffs with China?
That's right. That's Section 301 of the 1974 Act, and that's a very effective tool. It takes more time. Remember, we're in an emergency, so we had to address this quickly, so that's why we use the Emergency Act. Section 301, that's something we've already done, with respect to shipbuilding this term. We have some other things in the works with respect to semiconductors, and we can certainly expand the use of that as necessary.
The panel that we did have in the International Court, I think, was a Reagan appointee, an Obama appointee, and if I got that right, and a Trump appointee. Is there a reason to think, with the composition of the Supreme Court, that you would get a reversal of that, Jamieson?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I do think that we're in a situation, as the president and others have expressed, that we have the judicial branch right now, feeling like they have some kind of authority over over matters that are clearly within the president's remit, not only constitutionally but as delegated by Congress. For a court to get involved and say whether or not a president is appropriately responding to a national emergency is really just beyond the pale, and I think the Supreme Court will recognize that.
Do you think at this point that the most important thing that we're talking about, I mean, Europe's one thing, the EU, even India and Japan, is it all about China, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, I would say that when it comes to the trade deficit, China's the biggest problem, but the EU is right behind them. And when it comes to, non-tariff barriers, certainly we have that in China, but we also have that in the EU with respect to their standards on industrial goods and ag, where they effectively block a lot of our products. Obviously, with China, you have a geopolitical layer on top of that, where their geopolitical goals are different and at odds with ours, and so that's its own challenge. But when it comes to the pure economics, I mean, we have problems with all kinds of countries, friend or foe, and we're trying to resolve those.
The EU, that was an interesting I mean, every day it seems like we have so much to discuss. Can you just give us some color on what you were hearing from the EU prior to that phone call over the weekend, and what are the issues that are most intractable? And now we've had a couple of days since the phone call. Where does that stand now?
Certainly. Well, just remember, there is a very long history of problems in U.S.-EU trade, where the EU has enjoyed very broad market access to the United States, and the EU on its end has somewhat higher tariffs than the U.S. They're not sky high like India or other places, but they're higher than us. And they have these non-tariff barriers that require our companies to, do double testing of their products once they might certify in the U.S., then they have to certify again in the EU under a different standard, or they block our agricultural goods because they don't like certain of the type of food or hormones that our food has in it. And these are things that have gone on for a really long time, and that's why the EU, it's one reason why the EU has a $240 billion surplus with us. It's not because they're competitive. We had this big Draghi report come out, several months ago saying how the EU is not competitive. So the fact that they, despite that, managed to have a huge surplus with the U.S. certainly shows there's a structural problem there that needs to be resolved.
Well, they're wrangling. We're wrangling cats, and this is like an intra-wrangle over there. They've got how many countries that they've got a
27. That's right.
Yeah, they've got 27.
So what is the chance that by July 9th you have a deal with the EU? And by the way, what's the chance that you have deals with, whether it's Japan or India or South Korea or some of these other countries, prior to that?
Right. So with the EU, to your point, they've got 27 members that they're wrangling, but they have had a fire lit under them. They know exactly what we want. They've known for weeks and months even. They are moving. The call between President von der Leyen and President Trump went very well. They were responsive. I won't go into detail because, again, we do these negotiations in a confidential way. But we are, reviewing possible ways forward right now. I'll be meeting in person with my counterpart early next week when I'm over there in Europe. And so we expect to, we're trying to achieve agreements in principle with these folks to give the general contours of these agreements so we can know, how we can adjust our trade policies towards each other to be more reciprocal and more balanced.
Yeah, the president in that Truth Social post that we talked about right at the top, Mr. Ambassador, seemed peeved. Do you know specifically what he's mad about, and what is he accusing China? Which violations recent, just since the Treasury Secretary got back from Geneva? What's he talking about that they've been violating blatantly since then?
Sure. Well, I mean, you saw the president's tweet. I mean, and you can just read in the news that China continues to slow down and choke off things like critical minerals and rare earth magnets, et cetera. Obviously our deficit continues to be enormous with China. There was some discussion of them opening their market, something that they expressed they wanted to do. We're seeing them do export curbs. We're not seeing major changes. So, this is unfortunately par for the course.
I don't want to take a side either way, but it doesn't sound like there's been what I'm trying to, I guess, understand is, given the post that we just read that the president wrote, it doesn't sound like there's some kind of new twist to this necessarily, though the post seems to suggest maybe that there was.
Well, we have one agreement with the Chinese from Geneva. That's what we're focused on. It's fairly narrow. It's about the U.S. and China taking down tariffs and for the Chinese also their countermeasures. And some of those countermeasures, we're just not seeing them go quickly enough. Some they have, right? Some they have, and that's verifiable. And others, they're being slow. And we're trying to work through that with them.
Ambassador, I had two other quick questions. One is this U.S. Nippon Steel deal and the golden shares that the United States government has assured itself of as part of that transaction has raised questions about whether a similar kind of model could be used for TikTok and could be used for other companies in the United States that foreign countries either want to own or otherwise buy. Should we think about it that way?
So some of that's a little outside my wheelhouse. I'm not involved in the TikTok matter, and the review for the Nippon Steel deal is the details of that remain confidential relatively. I would say that the United States, the underlying principle is that the United States should have control over key critical sectors, whether it's basic manufacturing or high tech. In the event that foreign countries or foreign individuals or firms want to acquire these companies or have large investments, the U.S. has to maintain control on things that matter.
And the other question I had is, the president's been very outspoken about his views about Apple and Tim Cook specifically. And I'm curious just how you think about that in the context that at the same time the United States has taken, for example, the EU to task for trying to fine or otherwise extract fees and other things from American businesses, and whether criticizing and publicly criticizing American businesses gives other countries sort of an opening to do things similarly.
Well, I would say that, the president, he has the prerogative of being the president. And if he has specific views and concerns, he's going to express them. And we all know that for the past 7 or 8 years, we have been trying to get companies to reshore to the United States and have supply chains that aren't dependent on China. And, the president in his first term, he tried really hard to get folks to do that. He sent very clear messages. He imposed tariffs that were incentives to reshore. The Biden team, whatever you might say about them, they kept the president's tariffs in place because they knew that was the right thing to do. And the president has doubled down on that strategy here. And so, when you see companies that after 7, 8 years of this almost bipartisan approach continue to be dependent on China, that seems like a high-risk business strategy to me.
Very good. Thanks for all the time this morning, Mr. Ambassador. And we're obviously going to want to check back in with you in this fast-moving situation that we're watching play out in real time. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.